And ladies and gentlemen, we are here for another episode of UnSpun Night 19. And today we're going to be discussing the origins of MKUltra. And I'm primarily going to pass it over to Joe this week because it's mostly Joe's research that he's doing. Some of my research overlaps with his, but he's really gathered together some key points on all of this, and basically what he's discovered is a tie between the Frankfurt School and Tavistock and the Stanford Research Institute that goes up into the American Jewish Committee, and reveals that a program that they had created, when was it, Joe, back in the 40s?
It was in the late 40s, yeah.
Yeah, became essentially the foundations of what went into the Macy conferences for MKUltra, et cetera. So where do we begin, Joe?
Well, oddly enough, we're going to go all the way back to the Shakespearean plays, and I would reference the analysis that I did on The Tempest. If anyone goes to postflaviana.org, you can see the article that I wrote on The Tempest, a sort of decoding the symbolism of it. And in that analysis, I show that, many of the things I show have been widely understood by scholars, that the play is basically about Isaiah 29 through 35 in the Old Testament. And so that the individuals in the play, the Tempest, the character Ariel, are all based on concepts that you find in Isaiah. And what I do is I go further than other scholars have gone, and I show that there is actually a kind of symbolic subplot that has been overlooked, which indicates that the whole perspective of Isaiah is being manifested in the play, which is to say that the Gentiles are being put into a dream, which is what is described in Isaiah. And this is what the expression "brave new world" means. This then becomes the basis of Huxley's story, with the drugs and the controlled environment. And so I had written that, and I'd also written the whole book about Shakespeare's Secret Messiah, and was interested in the relationship between sort of this project that Shakespeare is describing and what we experience in our modern world. When you look at what we've been showing about MKUltra, you're basically into a very sophisticated kind of mind control, kind of a dream that people are being placed into. And so, many people have wondered, well, what was the basis of MKUltra? Where did it start? And certainly, parts of its origin comes right from Gregory Bateson. And if you look at articles John and I have written, we talk about this, that Bateson, when he gave Truman the basis for the establishment of the CIA, basically said that set-piece wars were no longer possible because of atomic weapons, and governments would need to learn how to control populations through mind control. Now, following the creation of Bateson's idea and Truman's funding of the CIA began this project MKUltra, which then can be seen as basically a way for government to control its population. But this was not, completely satisfying to me, because you have to wonder, well, you're giving LSD to people unwittingly, you're moving all of culture into a debased area. Why would elements in the government accept this? This just seems so morally abhorrent. And I was always curious if there had been something actually in back of what Bateson had come up with. And if you follow Bateson, backward in time from the creation of MKUltra, you go to the Macy conference, right? Which Jan has done a really good job of explaining, and those who want to understand the Macy conference and its connections into MKUltra, just go to Gnostic Media and use the brain, and I'm sure you can find your way through all of the things that it has been involved with. But the Macy conference had something inside it that I was unaware of until recently, which is that the Frankfurt School, which many people have referenced as something that was a precursor of MKUltra, had actually had an intern period. So that the Frankfurt School was developed basically by the Comintern, by the International Communist Party, and was involved with sort of the intellectual structure, particularly in the Hungarian Revolution. And so when I looked at the Frankfurt School, you come to this individual, Gregor Lukács, which is, I'm sure someone will, easy to find, but Lukács was, he was a Marxist who, he said that in order for Marxism to succeed, you need to have a different perspective. You need to use basically social engineering to be able to control the masses. Now, this is the first kind of transition that I want to point out to the audience, is that Lukács makes a transition from believing in classic Marxism with military revolution to a cultural engineer. Even though he claims to accept the tenets of Marxism, the principles, whatever one makes of those things, he says, no, you've got to go into a kind of social control to be able to have a better kind of understanding of what can be done with the populations. And so I'm having trouble with my screen. But Lukács says that, you wanted to use persuasion instead of force. So totally different than Marx with the violent revolution. But, he retained all of these other kind of elements of Marxism. And so Lukács then went forward and he founded the Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School was sort of basically the kind of Marxism that Lukács had envisioned, which was mind control as opposed to military force. It implemented what was called cultural Marxism. Cultural Marxism is just basically all of the different elements of culture are under scrutiny, and everything is basically seen as something that can be controlled. They came up with something called critical theory, which basically provided a way of criticizing all of the classic European cultural elements. And now,
while just to interject, while simultaneously ignoring all of their own, essentially what they did is they structured all of these attacks against gentile groups, gentile cohesion, while avoiding commentary of their own Zionism, group cohesion, or any of the things that they did or may have done that may have led to anti-Semitism from Gentiles.
Right, exactly. And that's one thing that's very important, is that these individuals are Jewish.
Right. And they were all not one of them admitted that the Jews had any participation in this stuff, nor did they admit the hypocrisy or contradiction in their, in Israelism and in Zionism and Judaism as a whole and its own group cohesion. It was only an attack on Gentile groups.
Right. And that is actually very accurate. They developed all kinds of it. With the Frankfurt School forward, they developed sociology, anthropology, different kind of psychological structures that were very critical of Gentile society. And in fact, worked to destroy the structure of Gentile society. But they never turned their lens onto themselves. They took the position that they had been victims of Gentile society and were, as far as I can tell, reading the material, they were basically didn't need to analyze their own psychology.
Right. It was an a priori the statement that they went off of, and then they used Hitler and the false Holocaust in Europe to then promote or then to then create this whole agenda to break and destroy this authoritarian gentile society while ignoring all the underlying lies and contradictions and everything else that pertained to themselves.
Right. And I mean, I think, in this show, we probably can't go into this complex subject of the Holocaust, but they certainly use the Holocaust as the basis for their philosophical perspective, which was that Gentile society needed to be dramatically transformed, and they were going to do it. They were morally able to do it. Now, one thing I'm going to mention is that one of the problems, you can see right off the bat when you look at these things historically, when you line up all of these things in the relationship, because Gregor Lukács had certainly founded and organized the Frankfurt School. He trained Adorno, he trained Horkheimer, Herbert Marcuse, Erich Fromm, all of these individuals that then went on and influenced Western culture. But Lukács was doing this and had this perspective long before the purported Holocaust occurred, right? He was doing this in the 1917 phase of the rebellion.
So this is long before they could even point at Germany or any of this and say,
exactly,
look, it was so.
Exactly. And when you see the unification, intellectual unification between what Lukács is doing and then what happens with the Frankfurt School, you can see that the Frankfurt School really has a kind of problem in that it's basically nothing but an extension of Lukács's ideas, but it can't really claim, as it did in the 60s, to have this kind of moral platform caused by the Holocaust, because all of these ideas they were attempting to implement in 1917. And in fact, Lukács, and I haven't been able to verify this completely, but I'm quite sure this is correct just on the sources that I have been able to read. Lukács was in charge of the sex education of Hungary and tried to dramatically change it into a kind of hypersexualized culture, right? This idea of sexualizing the culture goes back to Lukács, and this is not 1960s. This is 1920s.
Yeah, this is before Wilhelm Reich published all
exactly.
Of
so that all comes out of Lukács. It's not the other way around. And so you have to wonder if this was always the plan. Now, when you you'll see there are many, many individuals that have written that this has been seen, this trajectory. The Schiller Institute, which is criticized often, but it certainly mention these things. The thing that they don't mention, the thing that really has caught me by surprise, is the fact that the entire Frankfurt School actually transitioned before members of it went into the OSS and to the Macy Conference. And we're going to get into that in a bit, because the Frankfurt School, even though it was started by the Comintern, the International Communist Party, ends up as a kind of intellectual structure inside of the Americans' military intelligence, right? Which, of course, is something that could not, why such a transition would ever be made is just, hard to imagine, but this is what they claim. Now, the fact is that the Frankfurt School was simply hired, lock, stock, and barrel, by the American Jewish Committee, which is the most, at the time, was the most important Jewish sort of socially organized group in the United States. And it hired all of the members of, or virtually all of the members of the Frankfurt School. They all went into the American Jewish employment, where they developed what's called the Authoritative Personality Project. Now, this project gets cited by Schiller and by many of the critics of the Macy Conference. But what they don't mention is that, in fact, it was not something that the Macy Conference did. It wasn't something that was developed by the Frankfurt School. It was actually paid for by the American Jewish Committee. That's where these individuals were working. And going back to the problem I've always had with the creation of MKUltra as to the moral perspective. I mean, who would have the moral perspective to be able to, do this much damage to culture? Where does that come from? That kind of, cold-bloodedness. Well, when I read through parts of the authoritarian personality, which was written, the section I was looking at, written by Adorno and Horkheimer, both of whom show up in one form or another at the Macy Conference. I read in their conclusion that they were advocating not just the psychological techniques that could be used on an individual basis, but that they felt that all of the different elements of psychological science should be unified, and these things should be basically brought about on a mass scale. That was exactly what they wrote. And so when I saw this, I realized that I was actually looking at what could very possibly have been the rationale behind of MKUltra. And then this idea is further supported by the fact that when you look at other members of the Frankfurt School, you'll see that basically those who didn't go into what became the Macy Conference out of the American Jewish Committee's work, went to work for the OSS, went to work for American military intelligence, and this would, of course, be a rationale for how military intelligence then was used for the creation of MKUltra, because the individuals with this perspective would have been in there and would have been involved with all of this. So you can see that there's not, in my opinion, we don't have enough evidence to be absolutely certain. But what I think we have is, when you look at the relationships between the idea of mass scale psychological techniques that Lucas develops, that then are promoted by the Frankfurt School, and that then are developed, and the Authoritarian Personality Project created these psychological scales. The scales were anti-Semitism scale, ethnocentric scale, and the fascism scale.
And they also had an anti-gentile scale as well. Is that correct?
No,
they didn't. They didn't.
I don't know what happened. They never got around to that.
How could they not? I mean, because obviously all of this is based on anti-gentilism. So wouldn't they need an anti-gentile scale to measure why they were
make
doing
sure
the
that they themselves, you see, this is the thing. They needed something like that to make sure that they weren't just doing all of this out of hatred. But in the post-Holocaust era, that this very simple point was never brought up. And you see, the problem, here's the problem, is that there is something morally suspicious just in and of itself, because when you are advocating, and if you read the final It's in chapter 23 of the authoritative personality, the conclusions. You'll see that what they're advocating is a
Joe, are you there?
Okay, I'm sorry I was cut off. I don't know exactly what happened. Hope this isn't some critic of the show. But my point is that to take the position that you can use psychological techniques to mentally control individuals, right? Outside of the democratic process. In other words, you're going to do this and use these techniques without their knowledge. This is absolutely wrong. Now, Jan is brought up on the screen. If you'll scroll down, Jan, a little bit further on the screen, I want to just read the actual passage so that everyone can see. It's all the way at the end. You just want to go to the end and then come back up. Because, but what he's showing is the conclusion of it, of the, all right.
The whole study.
Yeah, this is a conclusion to the study. And what you're going to see here in a second, if you just roll down a little bit. Okay.
All right, I'll go faster here.
All right, yeah, we're coming right up to it here.
This is great.
Great. Okay, just roll up just a little bit. Okay, roll. Go. No, you got to go back. Go back. Okay, right. Okay, hold on a second. Go up a little bit. It's got to. No. Yeah, go down. Sorry. Yeah, go down. Okay. All right. Oh, there it is. All right. So, what it says is that resistance to self-insight is contrived, most essentially of the same stuff, right? So he says techniques for overcoming, have been developed in the field of psychotherapy, can be improved and adapted for use with groups and even for use on a mass scale. All right, now, I'm sorry, but this is basically the intellectual equivalent of dictatorship and fascism. Because what they're saying is they have the moral right to program the Gentiles in order to...
Well, Joe, aren't they complaining about an authority complex while assuming authority to do so?
It would be really hard to argue against that, Jan, because they're not only assuming authority, but they are developing science for the mental...
Right. Well, I'm baffled at the feeble-mindedness of such contradictions.
Well, when you burrow into contradictions, often you find basically evil. And here I think you probably are. Now, I want to also, just because we're going there, and so I want to make sure that everyone understands. This isn't, the advocation of a general anti-Semitism. We're not trying to get 100 on the AS scale here. We're not accusing Jews in general. What we're saying is that the society that controls culture has inside it this component, and it is not something that it can even disclose to Jews who are not inside the deal. You don't have ordinary Jewish people aware of this, and I hope most of them would be as outraged as Gentiles should be. But anyway, when you see this relationship that goes completely and fluidly and intellectually, without any seams, from the Frankfurt School into the American Jewish Committee, into the Macy Conference where these people end up next, and then on to MKUltra. Now, just to give an example, one of the authors of the study, N. Nesbitt Sanford, ends up working in the SRI with MKUltra and writing the book Utopiates, the use and users of LSD. So this is just one example. There is this complete intellectual stream that flows right from the Frankfurt School, right through the American Jewish Committee, right into the OSS and the American and the Macy Conference, and then into MKUltra. And then, you have things like, and here's where it really gets just absolutely sickening to me, is that you have connections between like Horkmeyer and Kurt Levin, who has as a you have as a protege Loretta Bender. Now, Loretta Bender, then, a Jewish psychologist, she does hundreds of electroshock and chemical lobotomies on children. And so in light of this attempt to develop science to control people on a mass scale, you have to wonder, is there a racial component in this? Because in terms of science, it's completely insane. And so if you want to try to understand, well, what happened, what motivated her, I mean, certainly you have to look back into the Macy conference, and certainly you have to look back into the discussions that have had about mass scale psychology, mass scale programming. Now, when you go further, finally, when you come out the other end, Jan, and you come up with the Grateful Dead and Ken Kesey, I would reference other articles that I have on the Post-Flaviana site decoding One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and I would also mention a book, the article I wrote on Bateson, which shows the relationship between Freemasonry and the Grateful Dead. And then, of course, the article Manufacturing the Deadhead, written with Jan Irvin, and that is also finally now linked on the Gordon Wasson Wikipedia site. I'm very happy to see. So little by little, this is coming out. And what I'm asking is that, look, there are people alive today, people who were participating in the MKUltra psychological technical expertise developments. There should be a whistleblower. There should be someone who can come forward and say, look, I was there. I know what happened. Here's what happened. Because there is no, in my mind, there is no seam between the ideas that Lucas develops and MKUltra. And they talk about the Holocaust. Well, here is a Holocaust. Here is a generation that was absolutely crushed.
Absolutely, yes.
With these drugs.
And not only that, but Holocaust means burnt offering. And what are they doing at Burning Man?
Right. So anyway, this needs to be exposed. There needs to be a calm but energetic investigation into these connections and into what could be the rationale that is in back of something as hideous as MKUltra. In other words, what I'm suggesting is that people involved in the decision to go forward could have in some way have had, well, this is basically a way to control the Gentiles, to keep Jewish people safe. And that, if that was in fact the case, that really needs to be exposed. That needs to be something that people, actually come forward and talk about, get into the open, and let's have a discussion about, well, then if that's the case, then what does the modern media have in back of it, right? What do when you see the destruction of culture that's going on with Miley Cyrus and all of the cannibal movies, the zombie films? I mean, are we still inside of this impulse that led to MKUltra? When you look, Jan, at this crisis in Europe with the Muslims, right, that they've all been let into the country, is this just a way to basically create a culture there that's fragmented? In other words, this theory of tension where no one has any sort of power because there's just so much chaos going on. In other words, they're turning Europe into a gladiatorial pit. Who is in back of this? And as I've said many times, we need to get some evidence. Angela Merkel, Sarkozy. I mean, the people who created the EU, who in the hell are these people? We need DNA evidence to compare against one to the other, because there is just a malfeasance, right? You can see it in MKUltra. You can see it in the Macy conference. You can see it in the people who came out of the American Jewish Committee, went into the OSS, and I think it has to be vetted. It has to have sunlight put on it so people, the public, can actually know what's happened.
All right. A listener just wrote me to ask if you could please sit better so they can see your face.
I will indeed. I often slouch just because that's the posture I'm in when I'm writing, which of course leads to bad grammar, but I can't help myself.
Yes, yeah, and then it's always a big mess of bad grammar. So, all right, so just some of the people, maybe we can cover more of these, but some of the people that were involved in the Macy conferences are Aldous Huxley, Arturo Rosenbluth, Daniel Levinson, Abram Hoffer, Humphrey Osmond, Dr. Harold Abramson. Several of these are famous for their MKUltra work. Dr. Gregory Bateson, of course, John von Neumann, Julian Bigelow, Margaret Mead, Nevitt Sanford, Norbert Wiener, Oscar Janiger, who was uncle to Allen Ginsberg, Paul Lazarsfeld, Sidney Cohen, who was...
Lazarsfeld's wife was in the group that wrote the authoritative personality. So...
is that... no, I don't have that in here.
And also Margaret Mead wrote in the Frankfurt School in their journal. And so you can see that this is just I'm going to use an expression here. This is a cesspool. Right. This is a cesspool of quasi or pretentious intellectuals,
pseudo anti-gentile intellectuals.
Exactly. And they're all working.
That all goes into create changing images of man and the MKUltra project, right, which then goes into Burning Man and the Esalen Institute and what's that? The Naropa Institute in Colorado, et cetera. And then they peddle their degeneracy all over the globe from there.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, it's a very precise kind of degeneracy. They know what they're doing. They have studied all of this. And this is the problem, is that what you have is weaponized anthropology. During World War II, 80%, David Price gave a number, I think it's 80%, but it's an enormous fraction of all anthropologists work for the OSS.
Oh, that's probably a different David Price there, is it?
I don't know, but I doubt it. But the thing is that what you had was an entire science that had been taken over and used by government to be able to develop weapons that could be used against the population. The scandal is so large, when you look in, going back to May 57, the Life magazine cover where Gregory Bateson begins the psychedelic movement.
You mean Gordon Wasson?
Gordon Wasson, yeah, Gordon Wasson begins it. Just look at what's involved in that. You've got Skull and Bones, a secret society, and you've got Gordon Wasson, a lifetime actor, someone who is his whole representation of himself is a lie, a weapon. The whole story that's being spun is fiction. All of these things are, done to damage culture. And then there it is. Now, if you look at the bottom of that black box, which describes Wasson's journey, you see the three words, teenage allowances, right? Now, that is supposedly describing another article in Life, but folks, this is neuro-linguistic programming. This is a crude and obvious version of neuro-linguistic programming. Inside the article that Jan is showing now on the screen, there is the description of Wasson giving the psilocybin mushroom to his teenage daughter.
Masha, correct.
Right, teenage allowances. All of this is being done. This is being done to attack the subconscious, to make something as dangerous and as stupid as taking these drugs for spiritual progress, to make it seem as though this was something that was fun and entertaining and safe and a good thing to do. And what you're going to end up with is suggestibility. I mean, this is really why the drug was so important to them, because they wanted to have the drug in effect when they then delivered the blow of the bizarre cultural ideas, turn on, tune in, drop out, take us back to the commune, take us back to primitive way of living, and then we're not able basically intellectually to defend ourselves when the next wave of anthropologic weaponized science comes against the population, and this has led us to our current situation today. Europeans just need to understand that, the 20th century was the century of our Holocaust. We had over 200 million people killed, and there are all sorts of bizarre reasons given for the wars, the famines, that destroyed us. But I don't think that these reasons really hold much water. I don't think that they can really stand much scrutiny. And I think that many Europeans would be wise to consider the possibility that really the way that the political forces have brought these armies together for destruction was because one group controlled both sides of the political system.
Absolutely. And it's eugenics, it's genocide, it's just wiping out populations.
Yeah, exactly. And
one thing I wanted to mention, Joe, regarding your point with the whole degradation of society and selling the drugs and everything, if we look at this and we look at how Huxley and Leary and Wasson, et cetera, all tie this back to the story of Genesis 3 in the Bible, it's ironic because essentially what the Jewish community has done is taken the Torah, which is the Old Testament, a Jewish book, and then used that to destroy the societies of Gentile cultures.
Right. I mean,
we see Wasson, Huxley, Leary. Wasson's story of him and Valentina on a walk in the woods on their honeymoon in that Life magazine article is exactly that. That's a spinoff, as I showed in Theogen's What's in a Name. That's a spinoff of the Genesis story.
Right. I had the same insight and wrote about this, and it's fairly obvious. And and professional researchers should have no trouble seeing that Wasson's story about how he became interested in mushrooms is actually a typologic homage to the story of Adam and Eve's expulsion from the Garden of Eden. And in fact, Wasson even talks later on in the story about how the mushroom represents basically the answer to all of the spiritual mysteries, just like. And just as a little aside, if you look at Skull and Bones, the organization that Henry Luce, who owned Life magazine, which produced the story, they have their secret number 322, which I think is simply Genesis 3:22, which is the Adam and Eve story, where the line is that you now know you now have become a man who knows both good and evil. You see, that's the line of 3:22. It has to do with taking the bite of the apple and knowing both good and evil. And so this is what the Skull and Bones people must, they know both good and unfortunately they know evil. Because see, this is what these secret societies I think do, is that they cannot represent the actual goal of the organization because it's evil, because it's violence, because it's genocidal, and so that's what the secrecy is. The secrecy has levels to it. There's always an outer core that looks benign, and the Freemasons have the Shriners hospitals and all of these thousands of people at low levels of Freemasonry that just seem like regular people and are relatives, whatnot. But as you go up the level, then suddenly the secrecy becomes more and more concrete, and when it gets to the point where it disappears to the public, believe me, it's evil. You don't need secrecy if you don't have really serious evil going on, and that's what you have, is you have this relationship between the Freemasons and probably an organization that ties into people like Adorno and Horkheimer, all these intellectuals, right, that operate the social engineering side of it. So this is what the public needs to start to screw down into. This is what we need to expose. We need to, understand little things like, the Boer War. What is the Freemason component to the Boer War? All of our history, Jan, for the last 200 years, this whole trajectory of violence and cultural destruction, it's all been programmed. It's all been planned. And our intellectual debasement, the fact that so many people are not able to think clearly, this is all structured. We are slowly succumbing to this force which has gotten control over the political, financial, and cultural levers. You see, it doesn't take many people, 100,000, couple 100,000. They can run all the political power, all of the media power, all the financial power, and from that position, they can then shape culture. And that's what's happened. And that's what we are suffering now. And that's why when you look at things like the situation in Europe, you're really looking at an attempt to genocide a civilization.
And then it's all sold in, you have to be accepting it's, multiculturalism, et cetera. But they've created this whole situation and then forced it on the Europeans to accept millions of refugees that Israel et al. Essentially created.
Right. And so, you get to this cultural Marxism, which comes right from this school, and cultural Marxism is what makes it so difficult to criticize any of these things, because it sells multiculturalism, and it criticizes anyone who shows that multiculturalism is damaging, right?
Absolutely.
And so this is kind of what has to happen here, is that the European needs to develop a spine, because the effects of all of these cultural influences have left us confused. We don't really know how to fight back. We get intimidated and confused by all of the, they have public opinion polls and psychological language. And I just wanted to reiterate that, all of this hocus pocus language, the language of Adorno and Horkheimer and Freud and Marx, the language is just a kind of mind control intimidation. All of these concepts, dialectical materialism, there's nothing in back of this. There is absolutely nothing in back of any of this. It's all just a way to appear to have a connection into this intellectual world that ordinary people can't see, to intimidate them. The thing to do with people who use this kind of language is throw a pie in their face. There's nothing there. They're just doing this to have a way to intimidate, so that the real activity, which is taking away the power of and the family structure of the people who are being intimidated, that never gets analyzed. It's like you say, there's never the scale goes anti-Semitism, anti-fascist, and anti-ethnocentrism, which meaning anti-ethnic pride, but there's no anti-Gentile scale.
Right. Just so you know, we can't see half your face. It's in the dark there. I don't know if you have a light you can turn on there or sit back a little bit. So
I have lights on and things. It's just,
well, you're leaned over you're leaned over in the corner, so we can't see you. So if you sit back normally, we can all see you there. There you go.
All right, so there it is. Anyway, so
now you turned again. You got to sit straight on.
I have to be able to move. Just put up with me. The thing is that we and how do we do this? Well, we have to start connecting with ourselves. Don't you agree, Jan? I mean, really what we need to do is to start to set up organizations that can make sure that these questions are asked, that the facts are actually presented clearly. Because let's face it, the facts of the unification of personnel that goes from the Frankfurt School into the American Jewish Committee, into the Macy Conference, and into MKULTRA and the OSS.
CIA at that point, right?
CIA, right. This could not be circumstantial. This looks like a very seamless process, because the intellectual content that is produced at each one of these stages, even though they should be dramatically different, right? I mean, why should the perspective of Lucas, when he is a Marxist funded by the Comintern, be the same as Herbert Marcuse writing Eros and Civilization and working for the OSS? You see, this is a very good and real question.
Now, what do you think it was that drove the CIA to adopt in all of these Marxist, communist agendas and the Frankfurt School, et cetera? What
there had to have been. What I think it is that there's an overarching organization that they're all part of. I think that when you look at the Frankfurt School, when you look at the Macy Conference, when you look at MKUltra, what you're looking at is what Ken Kesey called the Combine. And I would ask people to go to the analysis I did of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, because it's clear as a bell. What Kesey's referring to is the Combine. And that is the connection between all of these secret organizations.
It's basically the brain database, the Combine.
The brain database shows the relationships. And what's great about the brain database is that it breaks through the camouflage that's put up with these secret organizations and with the lifetime actor personas, right? You have two things. You've got the secret organizations, which supposedly are not in communication and connection and are not in control by one group. And then you also have the lifetime actor, right, who has some kind of personality like Aldous Huxley or Gregory Basin or Gordon Wasson. But with the brain database, you can see the interconnections. You can see that one individual is related to another. And the picture that Jan is showing here, you see of Huxley, notice that Huxley's making the one eye representation. Now,
he was blind also, but yeah, that's definitely the
but this is why they do it, is that they want to make sure that they can represent themselves as being connected into the Freemason, the all-seeing eye.
Absolutely.
Right. And there's Ken
Kesey.
And we exposed Kesey very well in his fictional LSD audio tape.
What episode was that? I don't remember. Anyway, they can go back into the UnSpun.
Look, it's on Gnostic's media site. Go there and see that. He claims to be under the MKUltra regime. He's being given LSD by the government, by the MKUltra program.
Well, look who dosed him here.
Right. I mean, it's just absurd.
Gregory Bateson, the same guy who founded the CIA. Oh, but Kesey, he wasn't an agent.
Right. And then if you go and listen to Kesey's own words, they convict him because Kesey says, "I see an all-seeing eye. I see Egyptian hieroglyphics." He's having a Freemason hallucination, and then he goes on and he says, "I see strobe lights and I hear rock and roll music." This is supposed to be taking place in 1955 in the Palo Alto hospital controlled by MKUltra.
Right. And that's supposedly, Kesey's LSD dose under CIA founder Bateson is what gave him the idea to play rock music with strobe lights, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So you can see that if you look at it closely, you can see that this was all set up. The counterculture is just another assault on our culture, and it is going on today. The same, they destroyed the documents, or most of the documents, gave no explanation for it. It was Helms, and Helms said, I don't want to embarrass anyone. Right. That's a reasonable, grounds for destroying documents as important to culture and democracy as the
Right. Well,
files.
because they didn't want the public knowing that the entire counterculture psychedelic revolution, Tim Leary, Terrence McKenna,
Exactly.
Ken Kesey, Aldous Huxley, the whole lot of them were CIA and MI6 and
that's what the
going
document
to
would have
Mossad as well.
That's the document that would have showed that. And so that was why they destroyed them. Well, anyway.
And they did more than that, though, Joe. What they did was they wrote, as I showed in my article, Spies in Academic Clothing, they actually wrote all of the books on MKUltra to then control the entire conversation and ridicule anyone who questioned the official storyline.
Right. And so this is why you've got to support our work and the work of this network, because, you know, when they control all of the ports of information, it's impossible for individuals to have enough data to be able to see what they're up against and then find a way to organize. But with the internet, we can get to the bottom of all of these things, and we can then exchange the information among ourselves and work out a plan to defend ourselves, because that's what we need to do. We need to do it quickly.
I like expanding it on guys like Huxley. Look at all the connections between Huxley. You know, if anybody ever wants to know why I think Huxley headed MKUltra, there you go.
Right. And so this is what you're dealing with, is that, you know, because basically it's sort of like if you look at all of the individuals that were in the band and were associated with the Grateful Dead, and you have Bohemian Grove, MKUltra, the Mellon family, Freemasons. I mean, they're just, it just isn't a collection that could ever be assembled accidentally. It would be like, as I said, it's like taking an erector set box, throwing it on the ground, and having a computer accidentally get created. I mean, it's just preposterous. So that's what we're dealing with, is really good evidence, because the associations, and this is a form of evidence I really want people to focus on, and to really realize it fully. You want to go to Gnostic Media and use the brain, because what you can see is that the connections and the as we showed today, between going from the Frankfurt School all the way to MKUltra, that all of these connections could not be accidental. That's really the point of reasoning. That
same participants, same boards of director members, this type of,
right? Exactly.
Right.
It's like, and see, this is the thing, is like, well, you know, Lucas is funded by the Comintern, and he wants to use mind control over the Europeans, and then the AJC. They are worried about the Holocaust, and they want to use mind control for another purpose. And then Macy has another idea, and then MKUltra has another. But you see, they shouldn't all be having the same perspective if they're actually different.
And then they all end up overlapping and then creating.
Right, exactly. Yeah, the OSS shouldn't.
But what happens is then they create the Mind Control Ultra, which is exactly what each one of these groups individually is talking about, with their overlap, which then, because of the overlap between the organizations, couldn't be coincidental.
Right. I mean, why would the American Jewish Committee hire the Frankfurt School, which purportedly comes out of Marxism, which is, supposedly hating religion? Why would the OSS hire members of the Frankfurt School, which supposedly comes out of the Comintern? Why would MKUltra end up with all of these individuals who had been related back to the Macy Conference, which is supposedly involved with freeing society, right? The CIA has this MKUltra project. So you can see that what we've been exposed to is just confusion that has been brought about by their use of titles. They create a new title for a new organization. And they create a new a proposal that typically will be trying to fix the problems that came out of the prior organization. But the control never goes away. The process never stops. And when you use the brain and when you use your own analytic mind, you can see that this is really what we're up against. We're up against something that is very old. This is probably as old as the play The Tempest, which I hope everyone does read the analysis of, because I think that'll give you a good platform for kind of understanding, the dream, the brave new world. I mean, that's where the expression comes from. People should bother to understand the play, because the brave new world, like Jan has shown, when you look at the connections that Huxley has into our culture, they're just so enormous. And Jan's assumption that Huxley ran MKUltra, I think, is correct. And I think that's why people really need to know what he meant by the expression brave new world, because what he means is the dream that we've been placed into.
Absolutely. And not only that, but reading Huxley's other papers like Enemies of Freedom, et cetera, that I pulled out of the CFR archives at Princeton, and all of the people, every single book on the entire counterculture movement cites Aldous Huxley as their hero. Every book, it doesn't matter if it was one of the pranksters or whomever you're reading it. It starts off with a siren going around.
I was just, you mentioned
a menage toward Huxley as it starts off.
Right. And the thing is, you mentioned the pranksters. I think we ought to do a show just on the pranksters, because this is another case where you can show that there's malfeasance just by the individuals on board, because supposedly it's a bus full of like hippies on LSD, right? I mean,
right. Well,
just Bateson had the idea. Hey, strobe lights, rock and roll music. I think I'll get this painted.
And what's even funnier, though, Joe, is like nearly every one of the pranksters goes off and writes a book or starts a cult or a movement or whatever. We've got all of these personal. So let's say you had a bunch of your high school or college hippie friends on a bus doing acid. How many of you are going to get off that bus, go write a book on it, start a cult and an entire cultural movement behind it? None other but this one. And then when you see the ties into the Maverick Festival and the Cacophony Society that runs Burning Man, et cetera, then it's the exact same themes, the exact same ideas, a lot of the same people. But
so again, this is like the computer that got created by dropping the erector set. I mean, it's just preposterous. This is a group that was selected and trained and had connections into the government and to military intelligence, and they also had access to funding, because then they could go on and create all of their, all of the malfeasance that this group has been involved with. So this is, it's clear enough. And I hope that if people have questions, they can go to Jan's site, Gnostic Media, buy Jan's books. They're available there. They're great fun to read. They're not just support for a worthwhile person, but also really good books to read.
And we can use all the help we can get right now as well. We've got a lot on our plate. I just had to pay $5,000 in taxes last week. I'm way behind, folks. All the help I can get, as well as for Joe, as well as for CCN, the network.
Right. So help us, but for heaven's sake, come back, because I think you'll see the show next week will be something that'll be very worthwhile. We'll do our best. Anyway, good. Are we done? Are we? There's still more time to film.
I think we have like a minute here left, Joe. I think.
Well, okay. Let's try to tantalize people. At some point, we should do a prankster show, don't you think? Just focus on that.
I do think that would be a good idea, and we can get into all of the pranksters. I mean, we've covered a number of them. We've covered Dorothy Fadiman and Stuart Brand, and I'm just about to release a whole show on the how that whole thing became the Burning Man thing, and so as soon as I'm done with that, people are going to get a big surprise on the Gnostic Media website. Hopefully tonight or tomorrow, I'll get that out if all goes well.
And we can invite Stuart Brand, who I believe is still alive, to come on the show.
Absolutely. Stuart, welcome aboard. We'd like to talk to you.
One thing that we want to always point out is that we are delighted to have the individuals that we cite in our assumptions, in our accusations, in our questions, have them come on the show, because we would love to start getting a group of these individuals that would participate. And I'm hoping we're going to find someone that may have taken oaths at one point in their lives to be.
I think we're at the time limit there now, Joe.
But I'm hoping that now we're going to find someone who later in life has decided to come clean and to be honest, and we'll find a whistleblower.
We haven't found him yet. Take care, everybody. See you next time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning into CCN. This unique network is dedicated to free and independent media. CCN was created with the belief that information is the common heritage of all beings, which is why our live stream high-definition broadcast is easily accessible and free to view. If we want to change the world, we must first change the media. Having produced over 1,000 shows in 2015, which are all archived on YouTube, we look forward to bringing you more groundbreaking, cutting-edge information in 2016. For more information on what is on, please check out our broadcast guide for weekly updates. CCN broadcasts in multiple languages and features some key voices of our challenging times who are all in pursuit of a free, fair, just, sustainable world. CCN belongs to you, the people, and it is up to you all to keep this network on the air. Please contribute to the Network Support Fund or visit the CCN shop. We thank you all for supporting free and independent media.